And in this tutorial, we're going to be talking about prepending to our doubly linked list. So prepending to our doubly linked list just means inserting the node at the beginning of the list. So when we prepend to our doubly linked list, there are two cases. Case 1, what happens if the list is empty, and case 2, what happens when the case is not empty. So within here, we have a case 1 situation. Header and tail are both equal to null, and we have a size that's equal to 0. So the first step to prepending is to test to see whether or not our doubly linked list is empty. So if header is equal to null, we know that it's an empty list. If size is equal to 0, we know that it is an empty list. So now that we tested that, the first step is to create the node that we want to prepend. And for now, I'm just going to call it n. So now from here, all we need to do is set header to point to n and tail to point to n, because n is the only node within our doubly linked list. And the last step from here is to increment the size. So that sums it up if we have an empty list. So now let's take a look at a situation where our doubly linked list is not empty. So here we have a doubly linked list that has 3 nodes, and we want to insert at the beginning. So the first step is to actually create the node that we want to insert. So now from here, after we create our node, header is always pointing to the first node. And I want to go one before this node. So who has a pointer to one before this node? Well, header arrow prev points ahead of this node. So what I could do is make header arrow prev point to n. So after we do that, we're not done. You can see that header arrow prev is pointing to n, but now we need to formulate a link between these two nodes. So now I could say n arrow next is going to point to the next node, and who has a pointer to the next node? Header. So we're just going to say n arrow next is going to point to what header is pointing to. Alright, so now that we completed the link between these two nodes, we still have a couple of more steps. So now header is always supposed to point to the first node, but this isn't the first node anymore. So now I can say header points to n. And the last step from here, since we inserted a node, increment the size. So now let's go ahead and take a look at this in code. Alright, so to get started, we have our prepend method here. It's not going to return anything, so it's void, and we're just passing in the data. So the first step says create a node that will be inserted. So we're just going to come down here. I'm just going to say node star n. It's going to be equal to new node, and we're just going to pass in our data. Now from here, let's move on to case 1. Check if the list is empty. So there are 2 ways to check this. Check if the size is equal to 0, or check if the header is equal to null. So I'm just going to go with header equal to null. And if this is the case, then we're going to make our header point to n and our tail point to n. And that's because n is literally the only node within our linked list. Alright, so now let's move on to case 2. Check if the list is not empty. So since we already checked to see if the list is empty, we could safely assume that the list is not empty. So I'm just going to use the else statement here. And now let's try to think of this logically. We want to insert n at the beginning of the list. Now, which is the first node? Who has a pointer to the first node? Header does. Now, who has a pointer that points ahead of header? Well, header arrow prev points ahead of what header is pointing to. So I'm just going to come down here. I'm going to say header arrow prev is going to point to n. But wait, I have to complete the link. So n has to point to the previous first node. So now I can say something like this. N arrow next points to what header is pointing to. But now we have to tell ourselves header is no longer pointing to the first node. It's pointing to the previous first node. So what's the new first node? The new first node is n, the node that we just inserted. And the last step, we could come down here and increment the size. So now from here, let's actually execute the code. So I'm just going to save this. And within our main method, you can see that I have this started. We declare our list and we prepend 3 nodes. And then we call the toString method. And remember, the toString method is the same as our singly linked list. So now let's compile it. And now let's execute it. And you can see that we get 3, 2, 1, and that's because we prepended. So 1 was prepended first, so it's last. 2 was prepended second, so it's second to last. And since 3 was prepended last, it's obviously at the front of the list. So that pretty much wraps it up for our prepend method.